All right, great. We're live on the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. This is Corey DeAngelis, the Executive Director at the Educational Freedom Institute. And of course, I'm joined, as usual, by the co-host, Matthew Nielsen, the founder of the Educational Freedom Institute. And today we have a super special guest, Katharine Birbalsingh. She is the headmistress at and founder of Michaela, a charter school over in the UK. In the London area. And she's also the author of a new book, The Power of Culture, The Michaela Way, which I'll put into the comments very shortly. But thank you so much. I've been following you for a while, Katharine, on Twitter, so it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so could you just go into a little bit of a background on your experience historically with education, and also give us a little bit of a background with your school, Michaela, over there in the UK?
Yeah, well, I've been in teaching ever since I left university, and I suppose I started off in teaching thinking that all the problems with schools was that there wasn't enough money, and that, the reason why Black children in the inner city weren't achieving what they should was because of institutionalized racism. That sort of describes the way that I was when I started. I then, over time, started to see that things were a lot more complex than that. This is just through my experiences in the classroom, and started to change my mind about certain things. I began writing a blog, which was then called To Miss with Love, based on the To Sir with Love, the movie and the book, where Sidney Poitier plays the teacher in it. Anyway, I wrote this blog, and people would come on and comment about my various stories about how little Johnny had his money stolen, or, little Amy had been beaten up, or whatever it was. And I found that those people who were more conservative leaning would agree with me, and those people who were left leaning would get very angry with me. And I would always explain, no, but I'm on the left because I'm a good person, you see. And obviously,
I'm a good person.
Conservatives are evil, and therefore I'm obviously not a conservative. I work in the inner city. How could I be a conservative? And the conservatives would come onto the blog and say, I think you'll find that you are a conservative. And what they meant was that the kind of values that were just embedded in the writing, it was obvious to anyone reading them that I was a small c conservative. It took me a very long time to kind of come to terms with that, because I think lots of people on the left, I was one of them, are sort of convinced that conservatives are evil. And obviously you don't want to be a bad person. So it's impossible to come to terms with the idea that that's maybe what you are. So over years, I wrote this blog. People would come in and comment back and forth, because there was no Twitter in those days. So you had to, the discussion happened in the comments. And then in 2010, I was invited to go to the Conservative Party conference to give a talk about education. I mean, there were various teachers who were doing it. And I thought, okay, I'll go and I'll kind of explain what I think the various problems are and what we need to fix. And the speech was a little bit too hard-hitting, too many home truths in it. And I got into a lot of trouble. I essentially ended up out of a job, and I was told I would never work in public schools ever again. So the only way I could then get back into teaching was to set up my own school. And in 2010, the then brand new Conservative government had brought about this policy on free schools, which our free schools are charter schools. They'd never existed before. You guys have had them for 30 years, where we only just got them. And I thought, right, well, I'm going to set up my own free school then. It took us 3 years of fighting a whole load of people who desperately tried to stop us from opening up. We had to move to 3 different inner city districts in London. I mean, I kept thinking you'd think we were, building nuclear arms, when actually, I mean, it was mad. People protesting, calling me names, sending me racist emails. You wouldn't believe it. Anyway, it was an absolute nightmare, but we got through, and we've now opened our school in 2014. We opened with 120 children. We now have coming up to 800, and it's really exciting because we've got a full school. We've got from year 7, so grade 7, right through to year 13, where our kids finish. And this year now, our first cohort of children are going off to university. And so it's really nice and lovely. And our detractors have finally, they've left us alone.
So I think most of the people watching this right now, as far as on my Twitter feed, are probably from the U.S. Could you just give us a little bit of a quick background of how it works when it comes to K-12 education in the U.K.? In the U.S., you live here and you're residentially assigned to a particular public school, and then if you want to go to private, you got to pay out of pocket. And then we have charters. So I'm hearing that you guys have like a charter school system, which is what Michaela is. Could you give us just similarities, differences with the U.S.?
Yeah, it's similar in the sense that parents don't have any choice. They have a semblance of choice. So politicians would say otherwise. What they do is they give you 6 options that you can write down in terms of your schools. And then the idea is that the local council will try and give you your first choice. But no, it doesn't take an idiot. I mean, everybody knows. If everybody wants to go to school A, then everybody can't go to school A. And so some people will get their first choice, some people won't, essentially. That's how it works. And the free schools, so same as your charter schools, they don't have as much, they're not outside of the system in the way that they are in America. So in America, you guys have those lotteries and the balls and all of that happen, and people apply for public school, and then they can also apply for a charter school. Whereas here, we are just like kind of any other school when it comes to admissions. You apply through the council, you get your 6 choices. Michaela might be one of those choices, and you might get assigned the school because even though you haven't chosen it, or you might get the school that you chose and get Michaela. So the British government were quite reluctant to go down the more freedom route of the American way, I suppose, because of the political quagmire that it is. But it's amazing because even here, with us not really being any different from a state school, people hate us, and the big difference, you say, how are we different from a normal state or public school? Because it takes a group of people to set it up, and you have to apply to the Department for Education, and you have a big long application, hundreds of pages, and you got to go for a big panel interview, and you got to have all these people on your board, lawyer, project manager, etc. When you actually do manage to open, there's a real sense of ownership that comes with that. And what the free school movement has enabled me to do is gather together like-minded people and put them all in one building. So we're all able to deliver a particular kind of vision in the way that you would do if you were running a private company. So when Apple are opening up a new Apple store, they don't hire a whole load of people who love Microsoft, they only hire Apple addicts, And so same thing, we, our kind of USP is traditional education, high standards of discipline. Now, I'm not hiring teachers who think, we want to be super soft and, we don't like giving out detentions, because they just wouldn't come here. So it allows us to have that vision that we can push on through. Whereas I'd say in a more normal public school, it's much more disparate and truncated. And you're not able to have that same visionary stance, which I think is really helpful when running a school.
So what is the Michaela way? What is that specialized mission that you're talking about? So I said we're very traditional. So the teacher stands at the front of the class, and the desks are in rows, and the kids look at the teacher. Now, I know many of your listeners might think, well, that's pretty normal. But it actually isn't normal at all in this day and age. I'd say over the last 50, 60 years, things have drastically changed. In fact, you would be hard pushed to find an elementary school. We're a secondary school, a high school, but you're never going to find an elementary school where the desks are in rows. And in a secondary high school, you will find probably a mix. Many of the desks will be in groups looking at each other, where the children sit in groups and then get on with their learning and lead their own learning. That would happen in a normal school. And it's called child-centered learning. Whereas our teaching is teacher-centered, because the children look to the teacher to be led. And that is because we believe that the teacher is in a position of authority. The teacher has a lot more knowledge than the children, and the teacher should be providing knowledge to the child. Now, again, your listeners might think, well, that's silly. Of course, that's what happens in all classrooms. I promise you it does not. Many teachers will describe themselves as facilitators of learning instead of teachers.
And then they move amongst the grouped desks to keep the children on task, as the children are meant to lead their learning. With us, as I say, the teacher is leading it, and the teacher is in charge. So we also have really high standards of discipline. So what I mean by that is people are very critical of us of having silent corridors, for example, when the kids walk to their lessons, they walk in single file. It takes about a minute and a half to do the transition, and they get into the lessons to learn. Now, some people say, wow, that's a bit extreme. Why do you do that? And I say, well, if you're in the inner city, the alternative is that children have their heads bashed against the wall, that fights are breaking up everywhere, that the children are running and screaming and slamming doors. Now, you might prefer that option. And you know what? I'm all about freedom. If that's what you want, then please go ahead. I don't think it's very beneficial for children, so I would rather have silent corridors. So, and it's not like it's a big thing. People see it as so oppressive. But the children here are perfectly happy. They just get quickly to their lessons. When you have children who arrive at age 11 with the reading age of a 6-year-old, you need as much time in those lessons as possible in order to catch them up. So we are constantly fighting what I would say a very liberal kind of view of education, often from people who are relatively privileged, who went to private schools themselves, who have no idea what life is like in the inner city, have no idea what an inner city school is like. And they sit up on high saying, well, you know, I'm obviously some kind of witch for wanting the corridors to be silent. I think they imagine that I go around the corridors with a whip, whipping children. When the reality is, most of the time I'm not even in the corridors. My teachers are all around saying good morning and good afternoon to the children and getting them quickly into their lessons. And it's a lovely thing. So those are the two big things. The third thing is that we teach gratitude. We firmly believe that you're a much happier person when you're grateful. And even if you don't have very much, and our kids, lots of them don't have very much, the fact is that if you are grateful for what you've got, you are more likely to take ownership of your life and try and make something of it instead of always seeing yourself as a victim. And I see victimhood really as the most debilitating thing that happens to children in the inner city, because they've got privileged teachers who stand in front of them saying, yes, it's really sad for you. You are oppressed, so you can't possibly make anything of your life. When in fact, what you need to do is inspire them to work really hard so that they can go out there and change their stars.
So obviously, you know, Katharine, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So heads up, fair warning. So obviously your approach with single file in the corridors and desks in rows is regressive. You're moving backwards. You're moving back to it, something that everyone has moved on from long ago. And so your test scores must be atrocious, and your college admission rates must be horrible. And so tell us about that. How's that going?
Yeah, well, it's going well. Although, interestingly, our detractors would say, you know, that's part of the problem. It's not just about exams. And I would totally agree. And I'll come to the point about it not being about just being about exams. So our children now are going off to university. We have what are called Russell Group universities, which is probably similar to your sort of Ivy League. And 70% of the kids in our sixth form are now going off to Ivy League universities. We've got 2 that are going to Cambridge. And then we've got other kids going to a variety of different universities. And there were some at 16, children can finish school here. So not everybody is necessarily going to university. That's the top half. The other half who left us at year 11, so grade 11, they go off here. That's normal. They take their GCSE exams and go off. They are at a variety of colleges doing a whole bunch of different things, you know, whether it's plumbing or hairdressing and so on. Really great stuff. They turn up on time. They always bring a pen. They're always polite. They know how to shake your hand and look you in the eye. I mean, these are all, and that's the point. It's not just about grades. So in 2019, we had our first set of GCSE results that I was just saying, they take at grade 11, year 11. And we, according to the score of Progress 8, which is how schools are scored here, we were noted as being the 5th best school in the country. So that was quite nice. And,
it's awesome.
The thing is, though, it really isn't just about exams. And I would stress that while our children have done very well academically, the best thing about the school is the kinds of children they are. Yeah. And I always say, come and visit. You know, before COVID times, we had about 600 visitors a year, mainly teachers from all over the world, often many who come from Chicago and New York and all sorts. And they can't believe what they see. And I see teachers, some people have broken down into tears, some guests, literally saying, how is this possible? I mean, how have you got these kids behaving like this? They can't believe it. And the kids are polite. They're kind to each other. They're decent human beings. If a plate drops in our canteen, it isn't, in other schools, what they do, a plate drops and they go, whoa! That's what they do. With us, a plate drops, 5 or 6 other children run to help them, to pick it up and take it up and help them. It is astounding. And I'm constantly amazed by the school whenever I see our kids and I'm wandering around the school and seeing them. They're happy, joyful, they're grateful because they love being here, because they remember what life was like when they were at their elementary schools. And the thing is, it's only through visiting, really, that you can see that. And of course, your audience is in America. But, if they ever come to London, they just need to get on the website. They can book in for a visit. Anybody can come. And when you come, you have lunch with the kids. You have a tour with the kids. And you'll see what goes on. And I don't, the tour goes wherever you want. We don't just show you corridor A or corridor B. We take you anywhere you like to see any classroom. And you will always see excellent behavior and great learning going on.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to join you soon and visit. I was just telling you before the conversation that I was last in London in 2019 for the Institute of Economic Affairs conference. And I was doing a panel with Pauline Dixon from Newcastle University on school choice around the world and her recent book. The Michaela Way sounds a lot like no excuses charter schools in the United States, kind of the strict discipline. And I've seen one systematic review on like the effects of those types of schools in the US. And I think Albert Chang, a professor at the University of Arkansas, performed this with his co-authors and found that they typically did really well when it came to academic outcomes. And I'm not sure if they looked at character outcomes as well. So it seems to be an evidence base, though, for this type of model. But at the same time, I know a lot of people are listening who may be homeschooling parents or doing the kind of pandemic pod or micro school thing this past year. Is your view that kind of this is the way, the Michaela Way is like the way for everyone, and that everyone should do it this way? Or do you think that there's room for people to kind of match based on their own family's individual needs? So I see the benefits of the Michaela Way. Then I also see like there's people have done really well with homeschooling and even unschooling in some cases. So where do you fit on that kind of debate?
Yeah, I think if you can homeschool, then do it. I think it's great. I don't have any problem with people homeschooling. If you've got a mom at home who can teach you loads, and if you can hire in the occasional tutor to help out as they get older, and if you can deal with the socialization, so you have some play groups and various groups to take them to, well, why wouldn't you do it? I mean, it's fantastic. I don't, brilliant. I mean, and advice for them. Well, I mean, if they're proper homeschoolers, they'll know all the various materials that they need to be doing, what they need to do. There's so much online nowadays. But there's a great maths online system called SmartTick, which I would really recommend, or iExcel is really good for maths. There's also something called Hegarty that we use here at school, actually. I mean, look, I won't go into it, and reading, do loads and loads of reading. You have a small child, sit with your child and read daily for at least half an hour, running your finger under the words, do some phonics with them. There's really no reason. You can teach a child to read before they're 4 or 5 years old easily. It easily can be done if you put the time in and you have the interest to do so. What is a little concerning, I suppose, is the way in which sometimes parents just leave it to school and they think, oh, well, school will take care of that. And I really, I'm always trying to ring the alarm bells on that, because lots of schools won't necessarily do that, partly because, I don't know, your child happens to end up in a class that doesn't have the best teacher. Your child ends up in a class that's really quite chaotic. You as a parent don't realize what's going on in the school. But people are always a bit shocked when I say, you don't realize schools are on fire. And people say, well, why are you saying this, Katharine? And I say, because I've been working in schools. I've seen it all my life. All my teachers have seen this. I mean, we all know what's going on. We have the inside track. And I say, how do you? They say, well, my child is at a public school and they're fine. And I say, well, how do you know? They come home from school. You ask if they're fine. They say, yeah, fine. And then they go up to their room. What do you know what's actually? I mean, the parents have no clue. And they also don't know the standard at which they should be working. They don't they don't really realize. And I think that parents in many ways are far too trusting of the school system. I have always said that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I think the best thing that any government could do is force all schools to be open at all times to the public. So we at Michaela are open to visitors at any time. And like I said, you can see any classroom you like. And the reason I say that is because I have had a career of being in schools where when any visitor would ever come by, and it was very rare, but if they ever did come by, they were always sent to see my classroom. But funnily enough, they weren't sent down that classroom next door, the next door. So the thing is, there's a bit of a mirage that goes on sometimes in schools. And parents need to be aware of this, which is why I'm all pro homeschooling. Now, or you do both. You send them to school, but you don't think, oh, ticked. It's not ticked. The box is not ticked. You need to make sure you're doing extra work with them in the evenings. You need to make sure you're doing work with them before they start school at 5 or, whatever age it is. So that's really important. I do believe in freedom. So you said, should all schools be like Michaela? Well, obviously, I think Michaela is the best kind of model. And I have to say, I do believe that if there were more schools like Michaela, not so many people would choose to homeschool in America, right? But sadly, there are not. So, I mean, we're literally the only school in Britain that is like this. There are others that are like it in pockets. And, but for an entire school to be like this, we're the only one. So, like I just want a few hundred. It'd be great. I mean, there's a few I could count maybe on one hand that are similar to us, I mean, there are 23,000 schools in this country. And I can talk about 5 schools that are like this. So we talk about freedom, but the fact is that the zeitgeist is with the progressives, which is about, group work and getting children out of their chairs and moving around the classroom and sticking Post-it notes on your forehead and doing God knows what. Total waste of time. Children are hardly learning anything. And because there isn't the same grip on the discipline, the children, especially if it's a difficult cohort with challenging background families and so on, like in the inner city, the children are beating each other up and behaving appallingly. And so, it's kind of, as I said, there are some people who would never want to send their children here, and they would rather be in a school where there's a bit of a tussle now and again, and they don't really care. Okay, fine, that's where you want to send your children. But I just don't think it's fair that there aren't enough schools like ours for those parents who want them, because there are more parents who want these schools than are available. And that's not right. And it's interesting that so many charter schools, as you've just said, choose this type of model. Why aren't they choosing the more progressive model? Because this type of model is the one that works. And it tends to be the schools that are in the inner cities that do this, because they know just how crucial it is for the child who comes from the poorer background to have that kind of structure and support around them. Way up down, I say down the road, you have to get on the subway and go up, but you'll find a private girls' school a bit way out. They've got beautiful grounds. It's very different to where we are here. And the girls there, when I visited, they don't need silent corridors. They're just fine without them. Well, fine. I don't have a problem with that. But if you don't have silent corridors here, you're going to have chaos. So I do think that each principal, each head teacher needs to make the right decisions for their school. And then the parents need to decide which school they'd like to send their child to. Now, of course, what some of your viewers might say, and I know people in England often say this to me, is, well, it's all very well you saying that, Katharine, but you're in London. And when you're in London, you can talk about people having choice of school because there's a few schools around you. But when you're way out in the countryside and there's only one school, well, how do you then do it? And it's a very good point that they make to me, which I'm not necessarily able to answer. Although I probably would say, if push comes to shove and you have to choose an option, then clearly choose the Michaela model.
So what? Oh, go ahead.
No, you go, Corey.
Well, what are some of the barriers to getting more of these types of schools in the UK? Is it government regulation? Is it funding? Is it parents, don't know that this is an option? What are some of the barriers to getting more access to these types of alternatives?
It's not, the problem isn't access. Well, I mean, it is in that there aren't enough of them. The problem is that there aren't enough people who think that this is a good idea. So most teachers are very progressive. Most teachers don't see the value in desks and rows and in the teacher being an authority and in having strict discipline. They don't see that because all of the teacher training colleges, the influence that comes often from the unions, but just generally everyone in education thinks that people who work in schools like ours must be mean individuals. So my teachers who are quite young, they lose friends when they come to work here. You know, they lose friends because they're considered to be bad people. Despite the fact that my teachers are up at, they get into school for 6:30, 7 a.m. every day. They work really hard all day for these kids. They love them. These kids are disadvantaged kids in the inner city of all different colors, you know, and religions, and they're working hard to try and make a difference so that they can make something of their lives from a family who's never been to university, you know. And why is it a problem that we're doing something that works with these kids? But people are so anti the idea that teachers should be in charge and that children, you know, should be obedient, that they should be, you know, it's really interesting. Your KIPP schools, you'll know, it's all over America. There's hundreds of them, and they do an amazing job in the inner cities, changing those children's lives. Their motto is work hard, be nice. And we actually
was.
They got rid of. They got rid of.
When we opened, we decided to copy them, but we didn't want to do it exactly the same. So our motto is work hard, be kind. So we had to be a little bit different. You see?
Well, you could probably take work hard, be nice, since they just got rid of it.
Yeah, they got rid of it. It's all yours, Katharine.
Well, I know. Well, and
back off, be mean.
And what is so horrifying is that people in America have put such pressure on them to change this, that it's a wonderful motto. I'll tell you why it's a wonderful motto. Because if I always say we want to get them to do all sorts of amazing things, but if at the very least, every child that passes through our care is able to do those two things by the end, if they're kind people and they work hard, I'm really happy if we've managed to do that for everybody. Now we want to do other stuff as well, but that's the minimum. And similarly with KIPP, they managed that. But then along comes BLM and along comes all these progressives, and they say, teaching children to be nice means that you're teaching them to be oppressed. You're teaching them to be subservient. And I always think, no, we're teaching them that when the plate falls in the canteen, that you should go and help your fellow classmate. That's what being nice is. It doesn't mean that you have to be the white man's slave. I mean, because that's how they interpret it. And I think it's so horrifying that a basic right that children always had, which was that the adults in their lives would teach them the kinds of skills that they need to be able to get on in life, two of which are being able to work hard and being able to be nice. And now those children are being denied this because the radicals in America have come out and stopped KIPP that do such an amazing job for these kids. And it's just really sad. It's really sad.
We're sorry that if to the extent that we're exporting any of that over to you, Katharine, we apologize.
Well, and you are. You really are. Now, I'm fighting here at Michaela to keep it all out. You know, that's what I do. But yeah, our culture is quickly changing, and it's because America has such a powerful cultural influence on the rest of the English-speaking world.
Some opponents of charter schools in the U.S. will say that this particular model is being forced down on parents in the inner cities. But what's the other side to that argument? What's your response to how parents are receiving this? Do you get feedback from parents on this type of model? Any testimonies from students, for example, that you could share with us? Or
well, I mean, look, we're massively oversubscribed. Loads of people want to come here. I mean, in America, you see all those people jumping up and down when they get the ball taken out, and they're all going, woo, woo, we in Britain think, gosh, that's very American, but excited, aren't they, to get the place? And that's because they know getting into a good school will make the difference between, success and failure for their child. And you will obviously have read Thomas Sowell's recent book, Charter Schools and Their Enemies, which I would highly recommend to your audience. It's really short. And he just does such a wonderful job of exposing what goes on in normal schools in comparison to charter schools. And he looks at the Success Academy in New York, where schools are actually in the same building. And they're getting totally different, test results, where he also tracks the kids who would have gone to the charter school and have gone to another school and sees how they do. I mean, there's no comparison. So I don't, it's ideology that stops people from accepting what works. Obviously, these ideas work. Obviously, poorer children are benefiting. And what people don't understand is that, well, what they don't understand is they want to feel good in the moment about themselves. So lots of well-meaning white people think to themselves, I don't want to be a racist. Is work hard, be nice racist? I didn't realize it was a racist thing. Well, I don't want kids to be nice if that means that if I'm saying that black children need to have this thing imposed on them by white people, because what you just said, Corey, that's the idea, because you often find a whole bunch of white teachers in the inner city with a whole bunch of black kids, and these white teachers are then forcing them to do this. Well, I mean, what I would say is people need to stop seeing this about color, that it's about adults being with children, and that, of course, the adults should be in charge because they know better. I mean, would you let a 5-year-old walk across the street on his own? No. You hold his hand. Do you let a 2-year-old pour a drink for himself? No. It is our duty to look after children. And children will always push back. That's what they do. They're naughty. That's why we love them. And when they're a bit naughty, you go, that's going to mean a detention if you do that again. And then they either don't do it again, or if they do, they get the detention. And then the next time, they don't do it again. Whenever we have teachers here visiting, they always say, what do you do when a child tells you to F off? What do you do when a child gets up out of your classroom and marches out? What do you do when a child shoves another child? And I
Give
say,
him a sticker.
Well, I say these things don't happen at Michaela. They just don't happen. Like the point is that if you keep the fence tight, you don't have, it's the same thing. We have an expression, I'm sure you have in America, you look after the pennies, the pounds take care of themselves. Same thing here. You look after the details and the big stuff just never happens. The progressives just don't get this. They just don't understand it. They don't understand the power of culture. And that's why our book is called The Power of Culture, because culture is the most powerful thing in getting children to behave in a particular way. And if you want them to be respectful, they need to be in an environment that demonstrates respect. If you want them to just be free and do whatever they like, well, they'll sit on their Xboxes playing video games all day, or they'll be on their smartphones on Instagram and Snapchat all day. It's one of the big problems we've got at the moment. Having been away, we were closed for a whole term because of COVID, and like all the schools were, and we've now just recently opened back up, and the kids have come back. And some of them, I promise you, are struggling to walk and to talk. I'm not exaggerating. Because in their homes, no one talks to them. And they've just been sat in their beds on their iPads for hours and hours and hours, for days and weeks. And so we're having to slowly show them now how to walk properly, how to speak in full sentences. Now, this was something we taught them before. They've now forgotten it, and we have to try and get them back into it. And that's not all our kids, that's a small number. But then even the other ones, they've fallen behind massively. Children from disadvantaged homes really depend on their school to be able to make something of their lives. And the progressive doesn't see that. The progressive just thinks, I want to feel good about myself. I want to feel like a good person because I'm privileged. So I'm not going to demand that they get their homework done for me, because what if I was poor? Maybe I wouldn't have had a desk to do my homework on. So it's too much to expect that of a poor child. But what they don't understand is, at the end, when they leave school and they've never done any homework, who loses out? What 20% of our children here in this country leave school functionally illiterate and functionally enumerate. Well, I can tell you what's stressful for somebody. It's being illiterate. That's stressful. And it's our job as adults to teach them so that they learn how to read and write and add and so on. So unfortunately, in 2021, we're having to fight for this because there are people who don't think that that's the case. They think, I mean, it's not that they're saying you mustn't teach them maths. They're saying that you mustn't have an environment where maths learning would be optimal. And I have to say, according to those Progress 8 scores that we got in 2019, I say 2019 because the exams that have happened since, because of COVID, haven't really been real. So I have to go back to 2019. Right. And our maths department was the best maths department in the country. right? Best one. We got the best results in maths. Now, I tell you how you do well in maths. You do loads of maths over and over again in an environment that's quiet, where a teacher can teach you, and then you can do loads of exercises. That's how you get good at maths. But the progressives say, no, let's stick Post-it notes on your head, and let's wander around the classroom, and let's make it kinesthetic. And that is not how you learn math.
So how has the last year been with the school closures? How did that go? Did different schools kind of close and open at different rates, or was it all at the same kind of time? In the US, I think we closed more so than in the UK. I think not until the second lockdown, right? In the UK, was there actually school K-12 schools included? I think the US has had schools closed pretty much.
We have less, I think, start. But no, in the first lockdown we closed, and then in March or whenever that was, we closed, and then we opened up again in June time. But we opened in June just for the exam groups, and then in September all the schools opened and everything was more normal. I mean, you had COVID procedures at school, but everything was more normal. And then at the beginning of January, they closed us again. And we've only just now, a week or two ago, just opened up now. And we don't have any choice here. So when the government says close, all schools, private, public, charter, whatever, everybody closes. And when they say open, everybody opens.
Are they really private then?
Well,
they're not really private schools.
It's interesting you say that. It's funny. Well, they are private. I mean, they're entirely funded by the private citizen. But the thing is that, I don't know, we sort of do what the government says. I mean, Americans are less, more of a strand of rebellion in America.
No, we had some of that. We had some of that in America too. For example, like the Kentucky governor closed down all private and public schools, but it's been usually when there's a government order here, it's been more so for all blanket on all the public schools, whereas the private schools kind of had more leeway and choice.
And some still closed down. Some still chose to close, but it was their choice largely.
Oh, I see. Yeah, no, we don't have any choice on these matters. And we're fingers crossed. We've done really well with the vaccine. And we've vaccinated everybody. Like, we're now coming to people in their 40s. So all the people above 50 have been done, I think, about that. So, or at least they're finishing up at the 50s now. So we're really hopeful that we're coming out of it and that we should just remain as normal, I hope. But I mean, during COVID times, we did Zoom lessons, we did Google Classroom, and they would send work. And my teachers are super committed, and we did loads and loads of work with them. In some schools, that wasn't necessarily the case. But we did loads of them. But what is really interesting is that Zoom lessons are, I wouldn't say they're a waste of time, but I would say that children learn probably about 20% of what they would normally learn. And that's if you're lucky. And the reason is because teachers cannot check for understanding on a Zoom lesson. So normally you pepper questions around the class. Oh, they haven't got it. I'm going to reteach it. They can't reteach. They can't do that. Not only that, but the key thing is that you need to quiz them all the time to make sure that they have committed the knowledge to memory. And you can't quiz them because they've got all the stuff in front of them. So it's impossible to hold them to account for their learning. And then the other thing is that you can't set them detentions. And of course, your bottom half of kids, if they don't have the detentions there, they're just not going to do the work properly. So they'll do it. I mean, our kids did it, and some kids did loads of it. But even those kids at the top who were doing loads, they haven't learned anywhere near as much as they would do if they'd been in the classroom. So we can finally put to bed the idea that tech could ever replace a teacher. It is obvious now that could never happen. The best thing for children is to be in a classroom with a good teacher. But for those homeschoolers, I get you, because when you send them to school, you're not guaranteed being in a classroom with a good teacher. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yep. So I have a question for you, Katharine. You brought up success academies earlier. KIPP is kind of in that same vein as Michaela. The three of you obviously have a lot of characteristics in common. And so one of the criticisms that comes up, and we like to play this game on our podcast here where we bring up some devil's advocate questions. So because we want to hear you give your your response to that, and we want to give you that opportunity. So one of the critiques of schools like this, no excuses type schools, is that the only reason that you do well academically and behaviorally for the kids that attend your schools is because you're selecting for those students. And obviously, the kids that want to go there are the ones with more resources, whether they're financial or familial or fill in the blank, right? There's a selection process that's happening there that guarantees that you're going to get those outcomes because those kids wouldn't be attending. They wouldn't even be interested in your school if they didn't have more resources, whatever they might be. So what's your response to that?
And in America, there might be some truth to that argument. But as I was explaining here, the admissions process here, we are just like any other school. And that means that there are kids who come here who don't want to be here. There are kids because they've just been placed here. There are kids who have chosen it, just like in every school. Like we're just like any other public school here in terms of how the admissions process works. So we're just comparing like with like. I do get the point that in America, the charter school is different from the public school system, whereas our free school here is not any different. And I would just add that cohort of kids that did brilliantly in 2019, they were our first cohort. And because nobody had heard of free schools here, people were terrified in those days because it was brand new, the idea. And so nobody wanted to come to free schools. It wasn't like in America, with people doing the lottery ball and everything, and you were desperate to get into a charter school. People here were terrified. I was having to go around street corners, handing out flyers. I was going into the mosques and the temples and the dentist's office and all sorts. And I was begging people to come and talk to me. I was going into their apartments and saying, let me sit down with you. Let me tell you, give me a chance, you take a risk with us. So the people who ended up sending their children here were not we call them sharp-elbowed parents who kick everybody out of the way in order to get their way to the best school. That was by no means the population who came here. Some of them, it was just because they happened to live nearby, and we are in the middle of the inner city. Some of them because I managed to convince them and I just grabbed them on the street. In fact, one of those girls who I grabbed on the street, she is now going to Cambridge in September. Like the fact is that we had a real kind of motley crew that started with us in September 2014. By no stretch of the imagination were their parents on it. I mean, I could tell you story after story of the kind of crazy conversations sometimes that I would have with some families. They had no idea what a free school was, So we did really well with those kids, I think, because of the way we teach them, because of our great standards of behavior, because of the buy-in in particular that we get from the kids. The kids really buy into what we're about, because the kids will tell you, when I was at primary school, I walked out of my lessons all the time. One of them depending on how the helicopter was looking for him once. And yet, when they're here, they're well behaved. They're totally different, And children love that because this is the one place where they can feel secure and safe and looked after. And they love the order and the structure. This business of privileged people telling my children they should just be free to do what they want. My children are free out in the street. They don't want that. They want somewhere that looks after them, that gives them order and structure. So, yeah, I mean, that's what I'd say. And also, Thomas Sowell does a really good job of looking at, for the charter point, of looking at kids who were going to go to the charter schools and then end up going to a normal public school and comparing how they do. And I think that's a really powerful argument against the people who put the argument forward, Matthew, that you just said. Because look, it's the same kids with the same interested parents, with the same, resources and whatever it is that you're saying, but then they end up in a public school. And funnily enough, they do a lot worse,
So we have a question from someone who's in the comments now, Erica Stanzi. Right when we posted this about a week ago, the announcement that we're going to have you on, she provided this question in advance, and she says, if you get the chance, ask Katharine about the massive disparities we see between boys and girls. Why do they exist, and what can we do to reverse them?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sorry because I'm speaking to two men. So, but I think boys take a longer time to kind of catch up with girls in terms of maturity, and sometimes
you would say that, Katharine.
well, it takes them a long
I'm
time.
still trying to catch up.
Yeah, exactly. Still trying to catch up. And I think that there are some boys. I mean, some boys are obviously fine, and they work hard, and they are intrinsically motivated, and they're okay. Yes, okay,
Right,
great.
right.
So but there are some boys who need more order and structure. There are also some girls who are like that, except that there are more boys like that than there are girls. And children who require more support don't get it in our system because the system is all about child-centered learning and being this self-motivator who's just going to sort yourself out. And, a 12-year-old, especially if you're a boy, especially if you are not, in the top set, you're in the bottom set, you're really going to struggle with that. And so it's for your school and the adults around you to give you that support and that structure and order in your life. And too often it is not forthcoming in our schools. So the children who end up doing okay in those systems are the children who manage despite the chaos around them, who are self-motivating, who are a little bit more mature, who quite like making their writing look perfect and doing little hearts at the end and so on. And that tends to be more girls. So overall, it looks like, well, girls are doing better than boys. But what people will often say about, well, if you want to do well with boys, you need to bring in competition. You need to give them stats that they can then work against to try and beat. Well, you know what? That works with everybody, boys or girls. Kids are kids. It's just that those things are really apparent with those kinds of boys because everybody would benefit from them. And those boys are not able to succeed despite not having them, right? We deny these children these things because progressives run the education system and they are in charge of the culture that is pervasive in our schools, so that teachers don't even realize that this is how they think. And when I say how they think, what I mean is thinking it's mean to give a child a detention, thinking that order is somehow intrinsically bad, thinking that teaching a child to be grateful or to be nice is to somehow teaching him to be subservient. These aren't true. It is simply about trusting the adult to be able to teach the child the right kinds of skills to be able to go off and do something with their lives. And it really upsets me because so many children, disadvantaged children, are let down by the decisions that privileged people make.
So totally. And
good way to say that.
One thing we wanted to ask, particularly because we snuck into the title of this conversation, is a little bit about what you think the education system is doing right, or what we're getting right with K-12 education, primary, secondary education, and what are some of the main issues plaguing the system.
Yeah, well, it used to be the case that I thought that schools were getting everything wrong. And my whole campaign was, you don't realize how schools are so bad. And to a certain extent, I still think like that. However, what COVID has shown me is that actually schools are doing something right. Because when kids from disadvantaged backgrounds are not in their schools, they fall behind massively. So what we're doing right is that we are giving free education to everybody. And in the 19th century, we didn't do that. So it's really great that we have a tax system that allows all children to access an education. Where we're going wrong is that we tend in the education world to believe in equality as opposed to equality of opportunity. And so we are quite happy for everybody to have different levels of opportunity, and for some schools to be terrible and some schools to be good, and a whole variety. We don't mind about that, as long as when they come out on the other end, even if they're illiterate and innumerate, who cares? Let's all just make sure that they have the same amount of money. So we just give them welfare, or we put them in a job, or we want it to look the same afterwards. So there's a sense of equality there, as opposed to saying, no, we need to make sure that all our schools provide an excellent education so that everybody has the same equal opportunity to be able to make something of their lives. And if they choose not to use that opportunity, well, then that's just up to them, as long as they've been given it. And the thing that breaks my heart is that too many children in 2021, both in America and in the UK, are not given enough of that equality of opportunity. And it's not their fault. Sometimes they've been born into a family where the parents haven't been able to support them for whatever reason. Then they're in a school that is totally chaotic. They're surrounded by gangs and, kids carrying knives and so on. In your country, they'll be carrying guns. And they just get whisked into this lifestyle that they can't then get out of because nobody put a fence around them to look after them. And, that can either come from the family. So woohoo, those homeschoolers, like I said, I'm all pro them because they are taking responsibility. They look at their children and they say, you're mine. You are my responsibility. You are my duty. And I'm going to make sure I look after you until you're 18. I only wish that every family said that. And too often, the media, there's no sense in the media that actually we need to hold families to account. We're always just blaming schools, and there is some justification for that sometimes. But I also think that families need to be held responsible for their children. And they aren't in too many ways. So, yeah, we do some things right. We give them an education. We just need to get the right ideas out and about to be. And I think the ideas we've got here, Michaela, obviously are right. And I think that I wish we had more of a voice. I wish we could get those ideas out there. And where I would say we might differ a little bit from KIP or from Success Academy, I mean, we are very, very similar, but I would say that we are openly very conservative at Michaela. So when I say very conservative, I don't mean big C, I mean small c. We actively talk about small c conservative values, like being an authority as an adult, like taking responsibility and personal responsibility for your actions, having a duty to your family and to your community to look after others, to work hard and pull yourself up. And no matter how hard things get, you're not going to see yourself as a victim. You're just going to keep on going. So those are all ideas that we are constantly pumping into the kids here in order to help them succeed with their lives. And we do that very, very openly, which I'm not sure, the charter schools that you mentioned would necessarily do that in the same kind of way.
Mm-hmm. So do you have more progressive or liberal parents that did any of them say, oh, we don't want you saying those kinds of things in schools, or are they okay with it because, they see it as a way to help their kids succeed later on in life? Have you had to deal with any of that?
Run into some.
It's interesting because, I mean, look, families pick our school. As I say, we're oversubscribed. But I do often think, gosh, I could hang a child in my office here, by the neck, and that nobody would ever notice. I mean, what I find is that the parents aren't that engaged. They just aren't. I think that parents in the inner city, at least here, I don't know I doubt that's the case so much in America, but they tend to just think, oh, I've got my child into a good school and leave them to it. They don't really. I've just found they sort of just leave us to it. I mean, they get upset when we confiscate their mobile phones. That is something they get angry about. That is the main thing they get angry about, actually. Or we're holding their child in detention or something. They'll get angry about that. But I tell the parents, you're coming here, you better get with the program. This is what we're about. And you can't pick and choose the rules that you like. I've got a whole bunch of parents who like the rules here, and I'm not going to change them. So you've got to get with the program. And they do get that. They get that point. But I do wish that families were a little bit more interested, actually. A little bit more interested in the schoolwork, a little bit more interested in homework and so on. We do tend to find that we're having to work a lot with the children because the parents, I mean, sometimes the dads aren't there. They don't necessarily exist. The mom might have a number of children. They aren't really able to engage on that kind of level. They might be having 2 or 3 jobs. They're not, it's not necessarily so easy for the moms to participate,
Does it seem like once the parents do buy into the school culture that they become a little bit more engaged with their children's educational experience, or is it pretty much the same before and after?
No, I'd say it's the same. the one good thing I'd say is I suppose they must like what we're doing, because otherwise they would be upset. And they do get upset when we take the phone. So, I
you can do anything to my kid except take the phone away. Anything else is fine.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, obviously we have some parents who are super enthusiastic about the school and they absolutely love it. And they're always saying how grateful they are and so on. But there are a lot of them who I don't really hear from. But I presume I would hear if they were unhappy. So, yeah.
No news is good news, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're coming up on the hour, Katharine, and we sincerely appreciate your time. And it's been really fun talking with you. This has been a very engaging conversation, and I'm positive. I mean, we got a bunch of comments, and that's been going through on Facebook and Twitter, and even on YouTube, where this has been live streaming. So we really sincerely appreciate your time today.
Great. Well, it's great for you to have me. Really nice, and it's so not. It's so good. I was saying to you, Corey, you're super brave out there on Twitter. It's really nice to have guys like you fighting, a different war out there. It helps those of us on the ground in schools. It really does. So I'm really grateful.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you as well for joining us. I want to thank all of the fans and the audience for checking out this conversation on the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. Again, this was our special guest, Katharine Birbalsingh from the UK, the headmistress at the Michaela school out there. So I put into the comments where to follow her on Twitter. It's just at Miss MISS_Snuffy. I'll put it into the comments again in a second if you want to go follow her work there as well. So yeah, thanks everybody again. We'll see you guys next week on the Educational Freedom Institute podcast.